welcome everybody. We're officially getting started. Hello and welcome to the National Constitution Center's online classes. Today we are going to do a few things. Number one, before I do this, I want to let everybody know that we are recording the meeting. So we will record officially right now. So welcome to the National Constitution Center's online classes. My name is Kerry Sautner. I will be your question moderator today. So in a little bit, I am going to be churning off the chat box, and I know that makes some of our students sad, but there's a lot of people on today. And as you go through the lecture today and questions pop into your head, send them to me in the Q&A box. Today is a great Fun Day Friday, and we're really excited about the people that we have online today. We get to kick off this Friday and kick off this weekend with a great historian and an unbelievable scholar. So without further ado, I welcome Jeff Rosen and Ken Burns. Everybody virtually clap for me. Okay, back to you, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Kerry. You were doing such a wonderful job leading all of the National Constitution Center's remote learning initiatives. More than 1,000 of you up to join with storytellers, most inspiring. Has said that almost all of his path-breaking documentaries ultimately are about the US Constitution. And what I'm going to ask him about today is three great moments in constitutional history: the American Revolution, the Civil War and Reconstruction, and the New Deal. And I'm going to ask him to tell us some of the key stories and crucial constitutional lessons that he has identified in each of those periods. And then we'll questions. So make sure to put them in the Q&A box, and let's get started. So first of all, Ken, thank you so much. It's an honor to speak with you here at the National Constitution Center.
Jeff, it's the other way around. It's so great to be caught up in your whirlwind for just a few moments, and thank you for the kind words about that. The first thing I want to make sure is that everybody is safe and they're taking care of themselves. The social distancing that we need to practice should only be in a physical sense. We can use this opportunity now to be much, much closer in a more metaphoric sense. So I would hope that this conversation and millions of others that are taking place help bring us closer together, make us a more perfect union when everything is so up in the air.
Inspire charge of us. We can become closer metaphorically, we can become closer as Americans and closer as learners about these inspiring ideals that unite us, that make us, as you said, quoting the preamble to the US Constitution, more perfect. Let's begin with another set of inspiring words. Some suggest that they're the very essence of the American idea, the American creed, the whole idea of America encapsulated in the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. And you're now working on a film, a series about the American Revolution. I'm just going to read to you this famous sentence, which so many of our listeners and friends will know by heart, and ask you what our friends, our fellow learners, about their. Here we go. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'll just stop there. What did Thomas Jefferson mean?
You know, I think it's
endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights.
Well, I think that sentence is, for me, the most important sentence in the English language, second to I love you. And I think what you have, and I'm very new to this Revolution project, but I've worked on films about Thomas Jefferson. For many, many decades, there has been swirling around in a thing called the Enlightenment in Scotland and England and on the European continent and even in the American colonies. An idea, again, abstract and metaphoric, about how human beings have certain rights. what began to percolate in the 1760s and 1770s in the colonies, the British colonies in the eastern seaboard of the United States, was how you might practically put this into practice because of a set of dissatisfactions that they had with the British government. So what you see in that first sentence is just the inkling, and it's a committee that's working on it that includes John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, and Franklin remarkably changes the first, we hold these truths to be self-evident, the self-evident comes from Franklin. Jefferson, the deist, still wanted it to be sacred. And he said self-evident, that these rights grow out of what we are all born with. And they're inalienable in essence. And so to me, we're on one of the great pivot points in not just American history, obviously, but in all of human history, because for the first time, people are taking what are abstract ideas about the rights of man, and they are now saying, we are about to start a country with that at its foundation. And so the Declaration is going to go on to list some complaints, and it's going to go on to suggest that together we stand and apart we fall. This is an idea that's, Franklin introduced as a postmaster a couple decades before, join or die, the idea that these colonies were connected to one another. But emerging out of this sentence is not just this new thing, this creation of a new thing, an American, a citizen of these United States, but for the world, a kind of North Star to tilt towards in terms of human rights. There could be nothing besides I love you more significant in the English language.
Wow, what a powerful statement. Friends, did you hear Ken Burns say that? No more powerful statement in the English language than I love you, than this famous preamble to the Declaration of Independence. And Ken, you're so moving when you say that the Enlightenment idea that we have certain inherent rights that inhere in us by nature of our humanity, they come from God or nature, not from government, is just as revolutionary as you suggest. I had the privilege of teaching the First Amendment this week, and we talked about how the framers thought that the rights of conscience were the quintessential unalienable rights because our opinions about the nature of the divine, our beliefs or lack of beliefs about true and lasting happiness come from our reason. And as creatures of reason, I can't alienate to you, Ken, my power to form opinions about the ultimate nature of the universe because I can't control them myself. They're the product of my external experiences operating on my reasoning mind. To what degree was this tremendous faith in the eternal divine power central to the framers' worldview?
I think it's central, Jeff, and you said it so beautifully. In essence, whether it's a belief in God or a belief in reason, that conscience represents the highest that we might achieve as individuals, and yet we are bound to each other. We'd seen the whole history of humankind up to that point in which governments were assembled based on a particular language, based on a particular control of a monarch, and based more often than not on a particular religious belief. But here we're saying we're starting from essentially trusting the ability of individual human beings to not only govern themselves, but to work in concert with each other to hear and respect. So all of my films I've made over the last 40 years have been about the US, capital U, capital S. But they've also, Jeff, been about us, and also we and our, the lowercase two-letter plural pronoun us. And what I've understood, if I've understood anything in the 40 plus years I've been doing this, is that there's only us. There's no them. And anytime anyone tells you there's a them, walk away. And so I think we're gathered today to try to say, how is it, even in this time of crisis, that we still keep the us? We realize that it's so easy to say them. Let's not go in that lowest common denominator. Let's take the highest common denominator implied with that wonderful sentence, we hold these truths to be self-evident.
Wow, again, what an inspiring message to all of our friends to remember what is common, what we share, and the us in the US. I have to ask one final question about the Declaration. You talked about the responsibilities that all of us have of self-government and the duties we have to each other in common. The framers thought that self-mastery, mastering our passions, being guided by reason rather than passion, was a responsibility that all of us had to be virtuous citizens so that we could serve others and the public good. What should our friends who are listening today think about their responsibilities as well as their rights as citizens so they can achieve that personal as well as political self-government?
That's a wonderful question too. And I think, Jeff, that what we're going through right now is a real practical day-to-day, moment-to-moment example of the kind of discipline that the founders were imagining. Let's remember, we've inherited a lot of abstract ideas from the Enlightenment about the rights of men, but we're not going to put them into practice. So we've automatically got a fundamental tension with the idea of freedom alone. Like, freedom for who? Freedom for me or freedom for us? So there is a wonderful tension between what we need, we need everybody to socially isolate right now, and what I want. Oh, I just want to go out and have fun, and do whatever I want, and do what I've always done. So there's an inherent tension. And so what the founders are saying is implicit in this freedom we are giving you is an enormous responsibility to control those passions, as they would call it, to instill a kind of discipline, to be guided by these larger ideas. Conscience is a really good way. Lincoln would later say the better angels of our nature. What is it that is best in us that we wish to bring to the moment? And then we figure out the tools of how we legislate and use executive power and judge all the things that are going to go on. And it's whether my town is going to buy a new fire engine. It's whether the dog collector is going to be paid $10 or $12. It's whether we're going to go to war against Germany and Japan. That's the kind of stuff, that range is what we're engaged in when we say we the people, right over your shoulder.
Beautiful. Thank you for all that. Well, you mentioned Lincoln, who called us to the better angels of our nature. And of course, Lincoln at Gettysburg promised to resurrect the pledge in Jefferson's Declaration that all men and women are created equal. And ultimately, it took the Civil War to enshrine in the Constitution the promise of equal protection of the laws and voting rights for African-American men, and to end the stain. What are the constitutional lessons that you would like our friends to take from the Civil War and its battle to enshrine equality in the Constitution?
Well, I think the fundamental one is, as you said, how is it possible that you could be started as a country 85 years before, when the Civil War started, and have 4 million Americans owned by other Americans? There were many compromises made at the time of our founding, including the Constitution, that set aside this fundamental dissonance, that how can you proclaim the rights of men and brag to the world about it, and at the same time have, by the time the war started in April of '61, 4 million Americans owned by other Americans. So the most important thing that the Civil War does is it ends the institution of slavery, and it begins in bits and pieces with the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, later the 15th Amendment, to extend to those people who had the peculiar experience of being unfree in a free land some of the freedoms that the rest of American citizens enjoyed. And we know that that work still goes on more than 150 years after the completion of the Civil War. So if we go back to the pursuit of happiness in that sentence you read, it's a process. It's not happiness. It's the road to happiness. A more perfect union suggests, as the Constitution's preamble does, a progression of actions. We are still on a road to getting better in ourselves. And what we do is take these great crises, like a revolution, which forms us, the Big Bang, the Civil War, the most important event in American history, and perhaps this moment now, and we translate it into material substance for good that allows us to go on. That's our obligation. That was the obligation of the founders and all the people, Native Americans and African Americans and women and shopkeepers who fought for that revolution, and even those who fought against it, as well as the founders. It was the responsibility of Abraham Lincoln and all of the people engaged in the Civil War, just as it is our solemn obligation now to figure out a way together to solve the problems that we have.
What an optimistic and inspiring vision of American history. The revolution is a big bang. The Civil War is this second founding, and your idea that all of the great crises, constitutional crises in American history, have led to a increasingly embracive notion that has included more and more citizens in the notion of we the people. I want to ask you what you think we take from this crisis that we're going on now, and how we might become more perfect and stronger. And in setting that up, I'll ask you, what did we do during the New Deal, which was the last great crisis following Depression, and how did the government, by growing stronger and more united, address that economic crisis?
We have a very serious and very real, and in some instances, very practical medical situation that supersedes everything. But lying just under this is the fundamental American question that has been addressed in the tensions at the founding, certainly at the reason why the Southern states felt that they should secede when a person who was opposed to slavery was elected president, and what the New Deal was about, which is, what is the role of government in an individual citizen's life? Is it merely passive, or does it have to have some muscular and much more energetic stuff? So in the Depression, we found ourselves in a situation where there was nothing to act. And what we needed was great leadership. And we found it in Franklin Roosevelt, who through trial and error, and let us admit there were errors as well as success, essentially reimagined what the role of the federal government is in the lives of the citizens. And many people still to this day debate and disagree with that. But those of you who are collecting Social Security can't argue with that. Those of you who wished that your hospitals have masks and PPEs and other things are looking at the tangible manifestation of the ongoing American argument about who's responsible at any given moment. And in what we found in any given moment of supreme crisis, certainly as the Constitutional Convention coming out of the Revolution realized, certainly as the Civil War realized, and certainly as we all more or less, or certainly an overwhelming majority, FDR in 36 won, 46 of the 48 states. That means we're with you, Mr. President. We say we need the federal government to take a large and commanding role in the daily lives of its citizens, to direct the activities of industry, and in this case, the medical establishment, to be able to address a national crisis. And so underlying our primary concern for ourselves and our family with this extraordinary medical crisis, which is the most important thing, and coming to understand it, we actually have to understand and ask of ourselves as well as the people around us, what kind of government do we wish to have? What kind of leadership do we need in a time like this? How do we make it more about us and less about them?
So Jeff looks a little frozen, so I'm going to jump in right now. Jeff, I'm just going to stop your video because we can hear you better sometimes when I stop your video. Ken, as we wait for Jeff to pop back in, would you like to field some questions from the audience?
I'd be happy to. Thank you very much, Kerry.
Yeah, absolutely. Turn my face back on so at least you have somebody to look at. So many good questions coming in and everybody's really excited to talk to you. So kind of going off of that question that you just talked about, and somebody asked this earlier, they sent me questions during the week and they wanted to say, we know Civil War was this huge time period and this moment of constitutional crisis is in the 20th and 21st century, it's a two-part question. One, what do you think in this modern times would be the next Civil War? And then the second, will this be also one of your next films, this coronavirus moment?
Well, I would love to have 15 or 20 or even 25 years perspective on this crisis, and to tell you, to make a film that celebrated the ways in which we got out, and not sugarcoat it, and tell the ways in which during the course of it, through myopia or intransigence or just bad leadership, we didn't do this or we didn't do that. I'm not ever going to sanitize American history. I think for me, the ongoing question, whether it produces a crisis of enormous proportions like the Civil War, or it has to do with a policeman stopping an African American on the street, a very singular moment, that the great struggle is the one about freedom and then a one about race, because they begin to merge if you're going to start a union but conveniently forget that African Americans are human beings and count them for the purposes of apportionment as 3/5 of a person to help your state's representation in the House of Representatives, but not extend to them any rights. If you're going to fight a civil war over that, and then afterwards enact Jim Crow laws to essentially recapitulate a version of slavery, and that it's going to take until the 1960s to legislate them out, but still to this day, we cannot judge all of us on the content of our character and not the color of our skin, as Dr. King said, then we've got terrific work to do. And that sometimes we can sometimes see, just as we have to, in this crisis, take it one day at a time, otherwise we can get overwhelmed. We have to understand that one day at a time, we also have to work on a more perfect union. You can't just wait for the Depression to come around to tinker with the machine. You can't wait for the Civil War to come around. You can't wait for Ruby Bridges in New Orleans, or Rosa Parks in Montgomery, Alabama, to do something, or Dr. King or somebody like that. Colin Kaepernick, if we want to bring up a contemporary, relatively contemporary situation. We all have to engage this dynamic within ourselves. Just as Jeff talked so beautifully about conscience, we have to begin to assume a larger conscience, that is something bigger than yourself. And if you don't understand that, go out into nature in this time. You're reminded of your insignificance. And at the same time, paradoxically, that makes you bigger, inspirited, just as the egotist in our midst is diminished by his or her self-regard. There's a very easy way, a kind of very simple litmus test we can all do. Go out there, look at the night sky, and wonder in its just unimaginable, flabbergastingly big scope what you amount to.
And this is perfect because so this is perfect. So for the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about natural rights. Yes. And to know that you are given rights and play a part in this larger sphere of nature. And you're saying, look at yourself in that bigger system of nature too.
Oh, that's absolutely right, Kerry. And what's so spectacular is that we're a nation, unlike any nation before it, founded without a religion. We're founded as like whatever you believe. And yet what emerges in the 19th century is a group of people, beginning with Ralph Waldo Emerson, and then with John Thoreau, then with Henry David Thoreau, and then with John Muir, who are beginning to say that maybe we can get closer to God or whomever that bigger figure is by being in nature. That's why we have national parks, because we want to provide our citizens with the inspirational possibilities of nature. Emerson saw it there, Thoreau took it to another extreme, and John Muir basically said that's an American catechism. We are bold, we are energetic, we think a lot of ourselves, and when we get out into nature, we are reminded of that insignificance in a good way. And that's what I want to point. So natural rights are indeed bestowed upon every being. At the same time, we realize that those rights come out of a nature which can be unforgiving, as this tiny microscopic virus is reminding us, and doesn't care. So the only thing that we have to fall back on is each other. So let's go back to the best sentence. I love you. And then let's take the second sentence. we hold these truths to be self-evident, and try to work some alchemy out of that. And so that we fall back on each other and what we need from each other. This is all the American experiment has been about. Certainly, it's been filled with greed and people who have tried to manipulate it for other purposes. But at our best, we're doing what we say, how to maybe merge my two best sentences together.
Jeff, you're back? No, he's not. We can't hear you, Jeff. Jeff is having a hard time. I think the universe is messing with him. So as we get your mic back on, Jeff, Chris Daniels asked this question for Mr. Burns. How would you encourage young students to record their time during this period to help with the creation of the historical record? Brilliant question, Chris, right?
Brilliant, because a lot of us filmmakers trying to get those letters, they don't exist anymore. People don't write letters, and we understand how ephemeral all of the texting is, even the emailing is. I suppose you could press print, I suppose you could research, you could get a hard drive, and the records of the United States government are switching from the physical paper to the digital. But I think there's nothing wrong. My little kids are now homeschooling, and we're having, we're having a tough time of it. It's claustrophobic. They want to see their friends. They're getting sick of each other. They're getting sick of me. And yet betwixt and between, there's so much love and new possibilities. I've been sent, a letter to Dada from Willow, a unicorn. This is my third grader. So I would encourage people to maybe pick up the pen and the paper and start a diary. I keep a diary every single day, a little just note of what I'm eating and what I'm thinking about and things like that. It's not that hard. You're not required to enter every single day. You don't have to have big thoughts. You can say, boy, I'm really sick of this. If I have macaroni and cheese one more time, I don't know what I'm going to do. Why can't I see all of these are fine. I'm making a film right now on the history of the United States and the Holocaust. That is to say, the part of the tragedy of the Second World War that had to do with the extermination of 6 million Jews and what we did and didn't do. And of course, one of the characters is Anne Frank, who's a 13-year-old girl who on her 13th birthday gets a diary. And she starts filling it out with what boy likes her, what boy she likes, what friends she likes, and things like that. After a while, as her family goes into hiding, she begins to have other things. She didn't think anything of it that much. But the fact that she was rounded up, her diary survived, a friend kept it, and she eventually died in the Holocaust, what we now call the Holocaust. Her diary is the most famous diary in the world. So let's all say we are Americans. We wish to live out the true meaning of our creed, as Dr. King said. Let us begin a record of our thoughts and our ideas and our actions and our deeds and our relationships and our loves and our passions and our conscience, and see if perhaps this becomes a document vital to future generations, just as this little girl's diary is so vital to us now.
So let me make sure I turn off my mute. Jeff, I'm just going to check in one more time if I can hear you. No, we can't. He's just going to smile and mime. Yeah, that's great, Jeff. So I think that's unbelievable. And I think it's so brilliant for everybody to remember that record it for yourself, but record it for history. Do it in a diary, do it on your phone, record yourself any way that functionally works for you. Record this moment, even if it's for your kids to go back to, but you never know the significance of capturing the primary sources. And that's what you are, a primary source in this moment in time. So I want to pause for a minute and go back to a different time period and question and say, what can this teach us about today? So the Depression, the Great Depression, you've done so much work on this and so much studying, and I know you have amazing online teaching tools on the Great Depression and World War I and World War II. Is there something from that time period that you can see some similarities and differences that maybe we can kind of look, and again, this is why we learn history, not so we don't repeat the past, but we can get information to be better in the future.
That's
So
exactly right.
go.
Kerry, really, really remarkable. That's right. History is our best teacher. History doesn't repeat itself. Mark Twain is supposed to have said it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So we're aware of similarities, and that's because human nature doesn't change that much. To me, I think looking at the Depression and World War II, the story is of shared sacrifice. That's what happened in the Depression and World War II. And that's what we can take today. We live in a media culture. We live in a computer culture. We live in a kind of binary world of ones and zeros. And we forget that that doesn't amount to anything when tyranny comes along or economic dislocation comes along or a virus comes along. And so to me, the overarching lesson that emerges from the Depression and into World War II is the ability of Americans to understand the need for shared sacrifice, period.
That's unbelievable. And I think, in this time period, seeing that and saying, what are these choices that you're making? And but also remembering that everybody's making these choices of self-sacrifice, and that can be really tricky on people today. And I know we're wrapping up in a little bit, but there's a few more questions that are coming in. And they're really coming in from across the board about where do you see any different parts in time period in history, from the revolution to the Civil War to the Depression to modern day. And there's even a question in here about baseball. What are some of those guiding principles and guiding light moments from those? You've said, the power of love and the power of equality and we the people. But where are those human stories that remind us to look to the people of the past and how they rose above, so we can remind ourselves to do that too? Are there a few you want to share with us?
Well, I think we've had examples of pandemics throughout our history. It might be a native village unprepared for the germs that the Europeans are coming in. And can you imagine what it might be like for the Native Americans to, just lose almost everybody in that thing? There have been other smallpox and cholera and typhus that have raged through the 19th century. We had the great flu epidemic in Spanish flu epidemic in 1918 and into 1919. So we have examples of people trying to negotiate that. To me, though, I think it's the best is the combination of the Depression with this economic dislocation and the sense of having to do with less, and then the idea of a common effort to beat an enemy. It is not by accident that we have used the terminology of war as we talk about the coronavirus. We have an invisible enemy. It is from within, but it is nonetheless requiring us to marshal the same sort of national interests. And what are the byproducts that could come from this? Is that I think that these petty binary yes and no, black and white, young and old, rich and poor, Democrat, Republican, Fox or MSNBC, that they seem meaningless now in the face of it. And what a wonderful byproduct if we could shed, like escaping the gravity of Earth, if we could shed the sort of dullness and torpor that comes with this simple binary thing that, you're them. You disagree with me just a little bit, so you become a them. And that suddenly we realize, this virus does not discriminate between Republicans and Democrats. This does not discriminate between rich and poor, although the poor will suffer the most because they lack the resources to isolate themselves in the way necessary. So then it is the obligation of the rest of us to help. We can come together, we can be an us, a much better US by being us and realizing there's no them. It's a very simple thing. It's very hard to practice.
And so as we go through this, and there's been some questions on here, and I also love this in general, there's been a few preach, Ken, preach it. So everybody's really enjoying it. So as you study American history, you study humans and you study American humans in all aspects. And so the question from Timothy was, do you believe humans are able to change?
It's the fundamental question before us. The answer very simply in an individual is yes. We have the ability to transform ourselves by accessing what Jeff had brought up about that conscience, that higher part of ourselves, whether it's reason or whether it's a supreme being, whatever it might be, you get to decide what that is or believe what you believe. Whether human beings collectively can do that, it's a very interesting thing. There was a moment in the Roosevelt series when, in the midst of the Depression, the commentator George Will, referring to Franklin Roosevelt, said that he had the Christian belief that the universe was well ordered and an American belief that history was a rising road. Now, if you go back at our series and look, the 5th episode, In the Depth of the Depression, I titled The Rising Road after what George Will said. We have to believe that. We don't have a choice. We have to believe in the perfectibility of these imperfect beings, both at an individual level, that is to say, I fail all the time, and at a collective level, we can do better. But that's the work ahead of us.
We have a large group of 5th graders on the chat too. So as I'm going through for 5th graders, we think, what does everybody always do to 5th graders that we're going to absolutely do today? We're going to assign homework. So as we think about that, so, a lot of the kids are trying to make sure that they're still being 5th graders and they're still being kids. And that's what you're saying about your kids too. It's hard for every grade and every level, but I think it's absolutely hard for our elementary and middle school kids too. So one of the things for homework is write down what you're experiencing, you're thinking, but how do you think is the best way to ensure that we're still connecting with each other and we're still engaging with each other around the Constitution with the Constitution Center, but around American history and remembering, looking back at these documents and saying, hey, you might not be able to read the entire Declaration of Independence, but we can absolutely read the preambles in the beginning and keep trying as we go through, and we can listen to it online. So do you have any specific homework assignments for our 5th graders?
Yes, I do. First of all, as my 4 daughters, who range in age from the late 30s to 9, know, every 4th of July, I read the entire Declaration of Independence since they've been little babies. So it's been inculcated into them. Oh, minus the list of complaints about King George and what his troops have done. But it's the beginning, the middle, and the very, very end, which is, spectacular poetry for all ages. But my network, all of my films come out on PBS. They have a thing called Learning Media, and within that is the Ken Burns Classroom. And a lot of these issues are being addressed. And for the adults in the room, we also have, and the students as well, a website located there at PBS called Unum, after our Latin motto of the United States, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. I'm all about the us, I'm all about the one. And so I would say, let's go on there. Let's think about American history in a new relationship. Let's stay connected. Now it has to be online to each other. Let's share those videos between each other that are so heartwarming. Italians singing to one another, the English family doing the version of Les Mis to new lyrics about the coronavirus. And the funniest thing is them fighting and arguing, as all families do before they start singing. Let's share the funny jokes together. Let's take it one day at a time. But when you go shopping, or your parents go shopping, 5th graders, ask them to get an extra can or 2 for the people who can't afford to do that, or the people that are too sick to do that, or the people that are too old to do that. And let's drop off at the food pantry. Let's just help us, each other, all the time. And whenever you do that, things kind of get taken care of. I mean, this is a tough trial to go through. It's unprecedented in our lifetime. It is unprecedented in American history. This is a big deal. But let's do what Americans do. Let's put on our big boy pants and let's get started in figuring out what the solution is.
Okay, so 2 more things. Number one, I'm also, if we're thinking about the Declaration of Independence, and I know it wasn't an official letter, it was a letter to the people, but you could write letters to your neighbors too, right? You could tell them what you're doing. Our one teacher online, David Olson, said, you know what? You can also write out your grievances to the government that you live under in your house, which is always a favorite. So I love that, David. So thank you for that one. But Jeff did text me a really good question. So, and this is how you can use technology in so many different ways. Another, and I love that Kale on the chat tried to tell me that homework assignments are not allowed across the nation. So these are almost our homework recommendations, Kale, but I appreciate that. So he said, thank you so much for showing us the connection between Jefferson and Emerson's concept of spiritual independence. And that's what we're all looking for. How do we stay together as a community? And how do we achieve spiritual independence at the same time? Is there an essay or a poem of Emerson's that you'd like to recommend for our group? And what we'll do after this is we'll send it out to everybody too, so we can send it to you if you can't find it and link it to you in the email.
I think I think the most important, let me not say favorite, but the most important is Emerson's essay on self-reliance, because it is essentially a declaration of independence from what he finds relationships that have over time grown to be imprisoning. That is to say, the customs and notions of society, feeling inferior, worrying if this person thinks well of you, worrying if this person this. And so he says in the middle of it, he says, say to them, oh father, oh mother, oh sister, oh brother, oh lover, oh friend, I have done this, and I am now going to do only what inly rejoices, I-N-L-Y. Now, Emerson would never for a second say that we were going to lose our relationship to each other and the obligations that are much bigger than whatever inly rejoices to serve the larger body. But the beginning of that independence, the beginning of the awakening of the conscience, the beginning of the spiritual acquisition of what the possibilities of the United States of America were as envisioned by those founders. The pursuit of happiness, he didn't say property, he said the pursuit of happiness. And happiness back then meant a lifelong pursuit of learning, how to get closer to something bigger than yourself. And so there may be no homework because, look, Kerry, we're all working at home, right?
Totally true.
Everything is homework, but let's try to add a little bit more to our daily discipline that celebrates the things that we've been talking about over the last few minutes together.
And a few students pointed out that, yes, yay, awesome. And I encourage you to do exactly what Ken just said. And the students then added, do it on Instagram, show what you're learning on Instagram, use Snapchat, use all the devices that you engage, but take this classic piece and then share it out to the world. So that is fantastic, unbelievable. I can see Jeff is clapping there at the National Constitution Center, but we just want to thank you all so much. Ken, we just appreciate you so much. We appreciate your words. Everybody on the Q&A has been thanking you. And we want to thank everybody for joining us today. We want to thank Jeff for his unbelievable ability to mime questions through our Zoom function. And thank you so much for joining us. We will send out a list of great resources so you can do this learning and awakening and poetry reading and writing and share it out in every medium you can to stay connected with the world. Thank you, Ken. Have a great day.
Hey, everybody. I love you. My favorite sentence.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye, everyone. I'm going to turn the chat on so you can all say goodbye now, too. Thank you, Ken.
Bye.
Bye.
Be well, everybody.
Be well. Oh, there's a lot of bye love yous, byes. Thank you all. Have a good one.